Hacca Howler's Eclipse 8 is what Jodio needs to achieve heaven, or at least a Steel Ball Run equivalent, which would make Hacca Howler less of a main villain and more this part's Poochie to Jodio's Dio, implying that both Hacca and Jodio need to grow as people, to show how even if you're born with the traits that embody the problems of villains, as long as you don't let those flaws define your life story, there should be a way you can be a hero. So what does Hacca's stand come from? How does Eclipse 8 work? And why would he become Jodio's trusted friend? The answer to all of those is the spin. And also a giant spider living underneath Hualalai. Eclipse 8 is based on superpositions. There's also the possibility it's based on the phases of the moon, but I'm gonna go on a limb and say its core ability is about splitting one thing into two to be able to do two things at once and control its position whenever it's not observed. Both thematically and given the namesake, the power fits. Hacca's influence, his method of solving problems, and his life story all come from being the 8th head of the Howler family, and he's got no way to solve problems on his own without that identity, so he's letting it all go to ruin. Eclipse 8 draws power from water in the ground. Its body is all cracked and dry because all it can do is dry up the remaining resources of the Howler family. But it does so by heating water and having it evaporate up into the air to indirectly surround it with mist, which then obscures what Hacca's doing inside of it. But something's not right about that. Jodio should be the one producing heat. His stand takes the air around it and converts it into water. But to do that, you use a proton exchange membrane. You take hydrogen, H2, good old hydrogen gas, you split the hydrogen atoms apart, and then divide them further so they're just protons and electrons. You push the protons through a membrane that only they can pass through. You feed the protons and electrons back into each other on the other side, but you stick some oxygen gas in between them. So this splits up the oxygen gas, sticking half of it, a single oxygen atom, in between the pieces of the hydrogen that are attaching back together, which gives you H2O and a little bit of heat. Jodio's stand, since it's the one producing water from the air and not extracting it from the ground, should be producing heat with the raindrops. Does this mean some things caused their agencies to be swapped? Is Jodio only producing cold rainstorms because Hacca's been able to get away with being the one to make heat? Heat is symbolic of a positive, and the energy things need to stay alive as the universe continues to expand and things get colder until everything fizzles out. And the Hawaiian deity for heat and volcanoes and creating Hawaii itself by shaping the land was laid to rest in one volcano on the island of Hawaii, at which point she became more of an ethereal deity whose influence now radiates from the volcano, in the forms of her breath being the steam coming from it and her body being in the lava. Sounds a lot like the Diary of Letrado, right? If we assume that being inspired by the original universe, there's some kind of immortal rock creature, like Cars, in a volcano somewhere, and we know Cars survived being in a volcano by constantly creating an exoskeleton around his body to push the heat away and shield his insides. And we also know that Cars could produce other living beings from his body. Then if there's a positive, so heat-based source of life within a certain volcano on the island of Hawaii, and something staying alive within that volcano, even if incapacitated, withstanding the heat by constantly shedding a rock exoskeleton and walling off its insides, is releasing temperature-resistant microbes or even rock bacteria from its body through the lava that's rising to the surface, then it would explain why there's a positive within the lava that the new moon lightning is drawn to when it creates the lava rocks. In the fulgurite, there was just enough of something invisible to steer the lightning toward it and symbolically carve it into the shape of a plus. But whatever's in the lava rocks would be on a whole other level, not just curving but fully trapping the lightning drawn to it and settling into the shape of a pyramid. Speaking of pyramids, the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs has really mirrored a lot of the elements of the part so far. On the lowest tier, the base of it, you've got basic needs for survival, like creating the islands and providing heat, just to come up with some random comparison to the 5th lowest volcano out of the top 5 on the island. The second is long-term survival through stability and security, like unifying a bunch of different locations into one society, if that's done respectfully. The birthplace of the first king that unified Hawaii was the 4th tallest volcano on the island. And in terms of stability, that volcano's so old, it's lived through something called a magnetic pole swap, where in the past, the North and the South Pole had swapped their charges. The third level of the pyramid is connection to others. It's social relationships and camaraderie. Howler certainly doesn't struggle with financial stability, but here he's running into a bit of an issue and he's stuck, which could be why he spent a lot of time clashing with the Joestars, Key West, and the authorities, all on the third level of his yacht, where there were a bunch of toys themed around having a hard time moving from the place you're currently in. There was a carousel, which keeps you moving around one spot, and there was a ball pit, which is like a normal jacuzzi, but a bit harder to move in. Hacca has been spoiled and childish thanks to his upbringing, but it's also held him back from really connecting with others, up until this point. And wouldn't you know it, the volcano by the airport that connects the island to the rest of the world just so happens to be the third tallest volcano on the island. The second highest pyramid tier is self-esteem and achievement, very human traits that were unlike the rock humans, and wouldn't you know it, the second tallest volcano on the island of Hawaii is very lacking in silica. The lava tends to not have silica, which is made from silicon and oxygen, and what differentiated the rock humans from other creatures was that instead of carbon, they were made from silicon. The highest tier is called self-actualization, and we'll come back to this later in the future at some point. Let's say you're a creature that doesn't physically interact with the world directly, but can tempt and bribe people through dreams and their feelings of greed. Wouldn't you want the ability to observe and connect with things over far distances? And wasn't Jodio talking about how there's a hierarchy of mechanisms, and if you climb them like a staircase, there's all sorts of stuff you can see at the top? Your vantage point will be clearer than anybody else's? The tallest volcano on the island of Hawaii is the one with an observatory on it, and it also lines up with the highest level of Howler's yacht, which was where the captain could see from and steer the ship. Obviously, this story didn't create the volcanoes of Hawaii to line up with the hierarchy of needs, but a lot of research goes into JoJo parts, and this location was chosen to be where Part 9 would take place, and what a lot of the elements of Part 9 were built around. Out of everywhere in this big world, Hawaii was likely chosen because a lot of things lined up, and a lot more than we're covering in this video. As another example of a choice that has a funny coincidence, in order to split the molecules of hydrogen and oxygen, like what Jodio's stand seems to be based on, you use platinum. The main idea behind Jodio's stand is tied to the song November Rain. There are invisible things in the universe we can't see. Most of the universe is invisible to us. And similarly, there are invisible parts of the world that have actual genuine weight. For example, the relationships between people, which pull people together. Or invented social concepts like debt and currency and economies and ownership that are mechanisms that drive people apart. Jodio's power is about temporarily splitting up bonds between atoms, like two hydrogens, so that they can travel down paths they wouldn't be able to get through while physically together, or be used to split up two other atoms stuck together to rescue the one they want. It's a power about temporarily distancing bonds to preserve them sustainably in the long term, and counteract other negative bonds that might be driving people apart. And here's the thing, Jodio can only aim downward, but he can rejuvenate Hacca, and Hacca can take that water, boost its momentum, and send it right back up to Jodio. If they work in harmony, they can create their own version of the water cycle, and potentially charge up drops of water, adding more and more weight, theoretically, infinitely. The thing that's worrying me about the two of them is what's currently inside of Hacca Howler that could be preventing him from being able to connect with others. That volcano deity ruled half of the island of Hawaii and rivaled snow deities who ruled the other half. In that way, they created a sort of north and south of positive heat and negative cold. And while the positive heat deity was at her volcano, the shortest of the five, the snow deities were split between the tallest of the five, the one with the observatory, and you know, it does snow on the tallest of mountaintops in Hawaii, and the third tallest volcano, the one about connection. Now that volcano about connection and the volcano of the heat deity are placed opposite each other on the north and south halves of the island. And the reason there's something not right about the setting of the JoJo lands is the positive, the volcano of heat, was the south one, Kilauea, and what would be the negative volcano in the cold territory opposite Kilauea would have been Hualalai. but for some reason, the lava and steam that produce the lava rocks comes from that volcano. So something resembling the heat deity in how it behaves, but that's a completely different entity, is mimicking the traits of the heat deity, but operating out of Hualalai instead of Kilauea. And this is bad for Hacca Howler, but makes him a bit more sympathetic, because if one of Josuke's strengths in JoJolion was that he drew power from his birth, and that's flipped in the JoJo lands, along with Josuke's other strength, supersymmetry, to be a negative that the main villain takes advantage of, then I think it's really telling that Hacca Howler is cursed by his birth position. The real main villain would be someone or something causing his influence to be defined by his lineage. And because his stand both takes after his role as the 8th head of the larger Howler family, and superpositions where when something is unobserved, it can be two things at once, it's possible that this guy whose memories don't line up with what he does and what happens on his watch could have a second entity living inside him that possesses him from time to time and is keeping the Howler bloodline going to pass from generation to generation. The deity of heat is described as having the ability to shapeshift to take the form of a woman or a white dog. It's possible something living underneath Hualalai reaches out to people on the surface through some kind of mental connection, tempts them, and then turns them into vessels, which, given their logo, would make the head of the Howler family the white dog this deity will sometimes appear in the body of. Take your best guess as to who the woman would be, because the one deity from the Snow family that lives on Hualalai is supposed to be a fashion designer, but higher up in the pyramid, one that creates the fabrics themselves that outfits are made from and gives patterns to them by making fabrics out of the fibers of local plant leaves. So, who's a fashion designer we know of further down the pyramid whose outfit is a flat fabric with patterns of plant leaves on it?